Welcome. This is Let's Talk, getting to the root causes of the important issues of the day. This on-the-air community forum believes your voice matters and welcomes all thoughts and views without judgment. Please join today's conversation by calling 415-663-8492. Are we tweetable today, Paul?
I actually do have the tweet box with me today, yes. So I'll just fire this thing up and we'll get it going.
So you can tweet us at Let's Talk on KWMR.
A tweet. That would be nice.
Tweets for my tweet. Sugar for my honey.
The number to reach us on Let's Talk is 663-8492. That's 415-663-8492.
And what is... and in the studio today, Charles Schultz.
Hello.
Shelley Rugg and Paul Rafael. And what's our subject today?
The subject is mental illness.
Aha.
And I think I want to start by explaining the catalyst for this topic. I had a personal interaction with someone in our community, and it didn't go very well. And my thoughts in the moment were, well, first of all, self-forgiveness. I was not in the mood to be as generous as possibly I could have been with this person. I was tired. I wasn't as empathetic as I could have been. And so our interaction escalated to a very sort of dark place. And it just made me start thinking about how we interact with people with mental illness, and then, digging deeper, we look at, some really terrible things that have happened to people with mental illness simply because of being misunderstood.
I obviously wouldn't ask you to go into any detail about that, but how did you know or surmise that perhaps you were encountering someone who had a problem with mental illness?
That's a great question. We had some people comment on our Facebook post, and, one of the things that was discussed was the spectrum, right, of our mental health. Mm-hmm. And that it is, in fact, a spectrum. There's no black and white when it comes to mental health. I think for me, when a person's mental health causes a disruption in their ability to effectively and sweetly interact with other human beings, when it disrupts their ability to really hold down a job, things like that, I think, when it gets in the way of them being able to have a home and pay bills and all of those things. You
were checking all of my boxes. I have failed this test miserably.
Oh, no.
So, a question. So, people who've had these encounters with mental illness could maybe call in and share their experiences or their thoughts on this topic. 663-8492 here on Let's Talk Radio. On KWMR, we're talking about mental illness and our experience with it. And so you're saying at that time, the thing I would say to be provocative is that the extreme of this is that only friendly encounters are acceptable or healthy, and so there can't be disagreement. Disagreement is by its nature unhealthy.
So that's a good clarifying point, because it isn't about disagreement or unfriendliness.
I say, like anger is
What was the nature of the confrontation? Let's put it that way. It was, screaming loud or
Threats, verbal threats.
oh, threats.
Oh.
Okay.
To harm you physically, or
To harm my reputation.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I wish I had the power to do that.
he's done already.
Anyway,
Yes.
guilty. Well,
Well, that's that's interesting.
And a non-mental ill person could do
be
the same thing.
Someone having a bad day.
So yeah, it's a really tricky thing.
irascible.
How do we determine this concept of mental illness? Where do we
Exactly.
give people that space? You know, you look at somebody from the outside, you can't see into anyone's head. But you don't always recognize, on another aspect of this could be dementia. My dad has dementia, and he otherwise looks completely normal. Normal guy. He gives you eye contact. He makes funny jokes. And until you're with him for longer than, 5 minutes, you might not know that there's something going on there. And so, because of the dementia my dad's had, the police called on him before because he became inappropriate. He lost control of his urges, shall we say, his compulsions to act.
Ooh.
For example...
That sounds like fun. Come on, this can't be all bad.
So here's an example. He would like to go to McDonald's and sit there and observe people and write notes in his journal. Mm-hmm. And one day he arrived at the McDonald's to find young children's bicycles lying in the doorway. Mm. And he could have just moved them over. He could have asked the kids, hey, move your bikes. There's any number of things he could have done. He chose to pick the bikes up and throw them.
Well, yeah.
Well, throw is such a relative term.
Indeed. Was anything broken? And the little spunks.
Yeah, well,
But the point being that it got him in trouble.
Right.
That it was
Wow.
perceived that this was an out-of-control human being, and we better call the cops. So then there's the whole issue of cops show up. They're not trained to deal with people with dementia, mental illness,
Not
mental
necessarily
incapacity.
trained, yeah,
And they may or may not recognize that. They, it's sort of like, I don't know, I lost my analogy, but, seeing the actions but not what's behind those actions.
Right. They're not necessarily, although I'm guessing maybe in Marin County we're, flowing with money, I'm guessing that they have training for the police, I don't know, for the sheriff perhaps.
Well, maybe the sheriff could call in. We have Lieutenant Doug
right.
Pittman here in town.
Doug, call it.
There he is, 663-8492. Let's talk.
And yes, we have a caller. Caller, you're on the air. What's your name, please? And please, keep your language clean.
Hi.
Hi there.
I'm trying to get this thing to turn off.
Good.
It's MK in Seattle.
Oh, it's hot up there.
Hello, MK.
Hi.
Hello, MK. Hello?
I was married for 12 years to a bipolar person who went for 5 or 6 years between manic episodes and was wonderful and beautiful and fun and gorgeous, and then would go off and be a real pain in the ass for 3 or 4 months at a time and end up in jail and end up costing lots and lots and lots of money. And, excuse me, cat. And my problem, this is a well-documented disease, and it was like the flavor of the month for a while because there was new drugs involved. And I think my biggest problem with the whole deal was that with the protection of the mentally ill person when they're in a really bad state. It's very, very hard to do anything about it because you have to prove that they are a danger to themselves and others. And many of these people are very intelligent and cagey and get away with a lot. So I have a lot of experience with that aspect of it.
Yeah, I hear you. I remember my mother, she was on various psych meds for panic disorders, anxiety, all that, depression. And I started going with her to her psychiatrist because she was tripping, basically. It was like she had dementia. And I started going with her, and what I observed is that she would put on a show for the psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And so I firmly believe that anyone who is seeing a psychiatrist should probably bring a very good close friend along.
An advocate.
Yes.
Well, wouldn't it be a sign that they're not quite, I mean, that if they can be so manipulative, isn't that a sign that they have some awareness of the conditions they're in?
Absolutely. That's part of the problem.
Now, not to get too personal, MK, but would you say that the conditions that you experienced with this person was related to sort of an inability to cope with, contemporary life, or was it something that was perhaps they were born with, that was more genetic, or that they had from early childhood?
Yes, well, he had it he got hit in the face with a baseball.
MK.
17 and broke his orbit bones just before I knew him. And no, I didn't do it.
Sorry.
And at that point, something clicked. And he would, from that point on, go off occasionally and travel and do all sorts of things and spend lots and lots of money that was not necessarily his. And
so this is maybe trauma to the frontal lobe caused this to happen.
I think it's genetic. I think there are other wackos in this family. Seriously.
No judgment.
Very intelligent people, and they're eccentric and charming, and then it slips over the line. And I'm drawn to eccentric, charming people. So.
Well, MK, what are you doing later?
Yes. That's why I like you guys.
Well, so, I mean, but you found that ultimately this is not that there was no way of effectively dealing with the problem.
Right. He would not take his meds. He would go into these remorseful states when as the mania was declining, and go to doctors and get his teeth fixed and do all of the things that he should have done when he was just being charming, and then he would leave the pills on a shelf. And because when you take the pills like lithium and Depakote and the things like this, they make you feel logy and not inspiring, and there's really nothing more fun than being manic in the beginning. I mean, it's just, you fly. It's just wonderful. You could see how much fun he was having, going out and buying $30,000 trucks and, just having all sorts of fun.
Well, I have a question. I've known people who've had schizophrenic breaks with reality, who've had hallucinations, who've heard voices, etc., and who have over time, been able to recover from this moment of some kind of psychic trauma in their life. They have these extreme experiences. Maybe they're institutionalized. Maybe they take medication. But that as year after year, they were able to recover from those things and become basically.
Well, that's a very special person.
So you're saying that there was no.
I think actually in my case, he had a psychic break about 6 or 7 years ago, and never came back. Usually he would be off and be this other person for 3 months, 4 months, and run up a lot of bills and get in a lot of trouble and drink a lot, and he'd just be a nutcase. And then he'd calm down and come back, but he didn't come back. And to this day, I don't have contact with him anymore, particularly. But I know that he could be living under a bridge. For all I know, and that's a very sad situation, because you alienate everybody, because you lie, and you're it's not necessarily a lie. It's your version of the truth,
right,
which is skewed.
What
But my point was originally that when you try to get help for the people that are in this state, as self-protection partly, and also to protect them from themselves, is that the rules in the state of Washington, where I am, it's almost impossible to get somebody committed involuntarily. It's very, very hard to do. He had to get arrested and thrown in jail, and then once finally nobody in his family bailed him out, and he had to spend 3 months in jail, and that didn't ultimately cure him this time.
Well, that's happening all over the country. I wrote in the blurb that 10%, they think 10% of prison population is actually patients that should be institutionalized, should be getting care, and the prisons are looking after them.
Well, there used to be a system of mental hospitals in the state of California, which was defunded by Governor Reagan back in the 60s. Before Reagan.
Yeah, it was in the 50s, actually, it started.
Yeah, Pat Brown.
They started this,
Actually, even, I guess, goes to Kennedy. With good intentions, the idea was to give people with mental illness more rights to, the course of their lives, and so they couldn't just grab you off the street and throw you in the institution. And at the time, the institutions were horrible places. I mean, same for people with developmental or intellectual disabilities. They would get institutionalized and not really cared for. Right.
Well, but the issue is it was going to be replaced by community funding, right? They were going to fund sort of, as you say, because the battle was being played out over this question of how awful the hospitals themselves were. So the hospitals were going to be closed, but then money was going to go into community mental health services. But the money never materialized.
Right.
They closed the hospitals, but didn't.
Because Kennedy was shot.
Well, no, I don't think that's why.
But that's part of it. I mean, he never was able to follow through
federally,
the next step.
But and then when Reagan, by the time Reagan got into office here as governor of California, half of the patients in institutions that were being treated in institutions were already out. So it was Governor Brown back in the late 50s.
I have a huge problem with the drug companies.
Yeah.
Me too.
Just across the board, they're in charge of an awful lot more than we know, I think. Well, and any illness that comes along, I think, what is it now? It's I don't know, I can't remember, but I'll think of it in a minute. Well, you just watch TV and you can tell what the flavor of the month is because they're pushing some drug.
There's a pill for that. Yeah.
There's a pill for that, and you can spend lots and lots of money. And if you can't afford this, and go to this other thing, and they'll,
Well, I think there's a more complex economic function to this. It isn't just to make pharmaceutical companies money, although that is absolutely what it does, and they push these drugs. They say 1 in 3 Americans get prescribed opioid drugs. Now it's for pain medicine. That figure just came out the other day. Every year.
Okay, which one of us?
Yeah, and everybody.
Well, who's got the pills?
About the opioid epidemic, but nobody mentions the doctors.
Well,
the ones that are prescribing.
The funny thing is that they actually had a concerted campaign in the 1990s to suggest that patients were being sent home with too much pain, and this was something that doctors could do something about to help people cope with the pain. But that was funded. These were campaigns funded by the people making these pain-killing drugs. But back to psychopharmaceuticals, right? The big one being SSRIs, right? Came out in the 80s. Eli Lilly's Prozac and et cetera. One thing that happens with depression is that you need lots of time. You need to sleep a lot. You need to do nothing a lot when you're having certain kinds of difficulties in your life, or maybe it's something that's more clinical than just experiential. But the economy doesn't allow people to just say, oh, by the way, I need to sleep for the next 2 weeks and just do nothing. I can't come into work. So the function of the pill is you can be in work the next day. You're not going to miss any work because of this problem you have. So it's just treating the symptoms of these particular conditions without ever a thought to what might be an actual, way of helping people get better.
Treatment. Yeah.
And also, I have Parkinson's, and they don't never tell you how much it hurts, but it does. And I'm using the cannabis derivative. It's 3 letters, and I can't remember what they are.
CBDs?
Yeah, I think so. And it doesn't make you high. It just really helps with pain. It's somewhat expensive, But but here we have the pot shops everywhere, so you can get pretty much whatever you want. But I use that, and it really does make a difference because I'm allergic to the opiates. And I'm also a very addictive personality, so it's not a good idea for me to take opiates. So, that it really does help. But of course, the drug companies don't like that because it's just not feathering their nest.
Not until they're growing it themselves, which they will be, of course.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
45 doesn't get his way, whatever. Anyway, that's my contribution, and I think that it's a really serious problem.
What would you have done differently in the situation you described in your own life? Was there something, if it had been present, you think could have led to a different outcome? Could have led to something?
Well, what happened was that he had a sister who was an alcoholic and a pretty messed up person, and she died, and he found her body in her house. And they were brother and sister, and it was a hideous situation. I remember standing in my garden and getting the phone call that she was dead, and thinking, "Oh, this is how this all ends," because I knew that he would go off, and I didn't know what would happen, and that's when I fled to Hawaii.
But I mean, in terms of treatment, I mean, some not.
Well, they have to accept it. Mm-hmm. You can talk until you're blue in the face, and it doesn't do any good unless they will listen. And I loved this person dearly, so it was a horrible, life-changing situation.
Yeah. Thank you, MK.
For which I am grateful because it opened up a whole bunch of other possibilities for me. But at the same time, now I don't have a husband. So.
No, I'm sorry, MK.
Boo-hoo.
Well, thank you so much for calling in.
Yeah.
Thank you, MK. That was wonderful.
Bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Let's
There you
Talk on KWMR. The number is 663-8492 to share your stories of mental illness.
And your thoughts about how mental illness is treated or stigmatized. Shelley, you brought up the point in your blurb about how the stigma of mental health we can see when someone's broken a leg, but not necessarily when they're having psychiatric problems.
Absolutely, yes.
It also becomes a kind of pejorative, a sort of medicalized pejorative. Somebody says so and so is on the spectrum. It's a way of putting somebody down. So you're saying that you don't have to listen to what they say because they're
on the spectrum.
They're damaged.
A spectrum or whatever it is. Yeah.
You could think of it a different way. It's a way for us to understand.
But is it though? Isn't it a way just to dismiss people you can't get along with, or don't maybe they're not particularly interested in you?
For me, it would open a door wider, because if I know what I'm dealing with, I can deal with it better, more effectively, and that's kind of what I was talking about earlier when I said I wasn't as empathetic as I could have been. I wasn't centered in myself and able to deal with the situation in a more effective way, even though I kind of knew what I was dealing with. I just wasn't prepared for it. But I think we've all had people in our lives that we really didn't understand why they were like that, and if we knew, they're up against serious depression. I had a personal experience with, there was a woman I worked with, and her husband was battling depression. And apparently it was very severe, such that he couldn't get out of bed and go to work at times. But whenever I saw her husband, I would have never guessed in a million years that there was anything wrong. He was smiling, engaging, interactive, doing fun things, surprising people, being generous, singing songs, painting, all these, overtly happy, friendly expressions. And ultimately, he killed himself because he felt that he was harming his own family.
Well, it seems to me there are two categories when we talk about mental illness. One of them is actually to do with maybe something that's genetic, maybe it's something to do with some kind of physical or trauma to the brain, or maybe, just something like that. The other kind, and this is the one that Irving Goffman and Michel Foucault and Ronald Douglas Lang, R.D. Lang were so interested in, was the way in which if you're not able to conform to the norms of a society, that is labeled mental illness. Being different. So it's easy to see the way the Soviet Union did it. Anybody that was a dissident, anyone that said this is a corrupt, society or government, whatever, they were labeled mentally ill. They put them into mental institutions because
it was a way of getting them out of the way.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
well, that's right.
They hadn't done anything bad.
So, and the state does it, but in America, the state doesn't necessarily have to do it because we have such heavy social conformity, which still functions to this day. Like Western is, as I say, everybody's different in exactly the same way. If you're not different the way they're different, you're not conforming, and there are real consequences for doing that. And so I think those are kind of like two distinct categories. And I think the mistake is that like R.D. Laing was so popular in the 60s and spent a lot of time in coastal California and down at Esalen and all that jazz. His ideas about how the actual social institutions like the family or the workplace, et cetera, were causing mental illness, those ideas were applied to that other category of people who are mentally ill from birth or from some kind of trauma or something that can't. So they're two kind of different things. I think one's about people who don't conform and the way that by breaking norms you're excluded or stigmatized, et cetera. Stigma was one of the names of Goffman's books. Incidentally, Paul Elmore, please do call in. He was a student of Irving Goffman, and Paul Fenn influenced by him as well, and a huge influence on Michel Foucault as always. But then there's other kind, which is just like people, and I've known these people too, who whether it's early childhood trauma, whether it's whatever it is. I mean, Ted Kaczynski said he was this wonderful little baby, and his mother said he got a horrible fever and rash and was covered in hives, and this had to be hospitalized, and personality changed after that. This sweet little boy, when he was 2 or 3 or something like that, now had a totally different perspective. So that's one kind of mental illness. I mean,
well, there's as Elizabeth Black, who is in the mental health, what would you say, mental health care, not business, but
profession?
Profession, there you go. She is saying at least 20% of your listeners currently has a mental illness, and many more of us have done in the past. And she brings up, mental illness can be applied to... when she lived in the UK, she had seasonal affective depression. So did I have a character flaw because I could not successfully meet deadlines, get up on time, feel like socializing, eat properly, or feel motivated? All criteria of depression, by the way. Of course not. It was something I learned to live with, work through, and learn from. From treatment, I gained perspective, humility, and understanding of my own limits, and a respect for others impacted by their own limits. Perhaps this is part of why I entered the mental health profession.
Well, can I say something quickly before you read that? This is the thing. We're no respecter of nature in this case. You're expected to work the same shift every day, no matter how much sunlight there is or not. Now, if, as human beings did for, all of our existence until industrialization, in the wintertime, you were much less productive. You did go out less. You slept more. You put on weight because you would, eat heavier foods, and you would, read or do whatever. You would not be engaged in the same level of activity. But the modern economy demands that on the winter solstice, you are working just as hard and have just as much energy as you do in the summer solstice.
And you sleep 8 hours a night, or there's something wrong with you, which is also not part of our natural thing. Anyway, let me just say that here we are at the half hour. This is KWMR, 90.5 Point Reyes Station, 89.9 Bolinas, 92.3 San Geronimo Valley. This is Let's Talk Listener Call-In Radio. Please call in 415-663-8492 or 8317. And KWMR is supported by the Point Reyes Farmers Market, Saturdays in downtown Point Reyes Station, offering 100% organic produce, baked goods, artisan cheese, as well as prepared foods. More information at pointreyesfarmersmarket.org. And KWMR is also supported by the Pacific Sun, Marin's Arts and News Weekly, online at pacificsun.com. And and also by Energy Upgrade, California's home upgrade program, sponsored by the County of Marin, helping homeowners make energy efficiency upgrades to their homes to save money and the environment and improve home comfort. One-on-one support available by calling a home upgrade advisor at 866-878-6008 or by visiting marincounty.org/energy upgrade. And as I said, here we are, Shelley Rugg,
Yeah.
Charles Schultz, Paul Raffel.
Hello,
It's
Paul.
call in. It's Let's Talk Call In Radio. Please call us 415-663-8492. We're talking about mental illness, the difficulty getting treatment, the difficulty of recognizing serious mental illness. Bernie Stephan wrote, I don't think there's a line that separates mental illness from mental wellness. It's used coercively in our society by those that pass for normal and those that can't claim that higher status. People with different ways of thinking are desperately needed these days, and I abhor such binary classification of beings. Surely we are all along the curve somewhere. Let's stop judging other people's mental wellness, except that, of course, of our president. Anyway.
Oh, did it? Zing.
Had to get one in. And we have a caller. You're on the air, caller. What's your name, please? Hello. Hello, caller. You're on the air. No? Okay.
Do call back,
Do call back.
663-8492, 663-8492 to join this conversation about mental illness. And just one small, example of, what is mental illness.
Yeah.
Famous Rosenhan experiment. We're all familiar with this, yes? But you'll probably recognize it as soon as I describe it. Miss Rosenhan, in fact, just died not that long ago. It was a group of young psychiatrists, and they decided to test the idea that psychiatrists knew how to diagnose mental illness. So these young people were all told to go to, or youngish people were all told to go to mental hospitals, present themselves completely normally as they were, with one exception, that they heard a voice in their head that said thud. In every other respect, to be perfectly normal. They were all diagnosed as mentally ill and all committed to the asylum. And what they learned inside was that the only way that they were going to be released is if they accepted the diagnosis of the psychiatrist and then showed that they were improving based on that diagnosis. When they said, no, please contact this professor or my family with this number, this is an experiment I'm in, they were like, this was just another sign of their madness. So this creates a scandal in the world of psychiatry. And the psychiatric hospitals say that this is underhanded, and they say, send us more fakes, and we'll find them. And so Rosenhan says, okay, we'll send you more fakes. A month later or something like that, the hospitals announced, well, we found 48 fakes. And, of course, Rosenhan says, we didn't send anybody. Yeah, we didn't send anybody to you. So it radically undermined the idea of the psychiatrist as being able to diagnose mental illness, which gives rise to the DSM-3, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which maybe we'll talk about at some point. But we have a caller.
Yes, we do. We have a caller. You're on the air, caller. What's your name, please?
Hi, this is Stephen out in Marshall.
Stephen.
Enjoying your conversation immensely.
Oh, thank you.
And how are you today?
I'm excellent. It's a beautiful day. I mean, it was. I want to just add something here that's it's not as personal as what you've been saying so far, but, the mental illness, actually, the police have really been on the front lines of that. The problem has been really dumped at their doorstep. Mm-hmm. Just some statistics. In 2002, when they did a study, New York Police Department responded to 150,000 emotionally disturbed persons per year.
Wow.
Having lived in New York, I say it's probably a low figure.
Yes, and not necessarily trained to handle them properly, or to go in, as we've seen in some other places, guns blazing, and
Or they
or
killed them.
tasers blazing.
They killed that guy in Orange County, and then another man was recently killed by police who's mentally ill too. I forget what that was. But I've encountered severe mental illness in my own family. I'm sorry, in my own, and what I'd say about it is actually this idea of the individual and their ability to heal themselves, and this idea of therapy and things like that for the individual has very strong and clear limits. And what it taught me is that actually, if you have healthy, functioning communities, which is an ideal, right? And I don't want to get into this. We get an angry call from Amanda. We have a community. Then there's a capacity for this group of people who this individual is interacting with on a daily basis to have some greater potential to be healthy or to be able to function. But this idea is a lonely individual with some pills or some therapy or some this or some that is going to be able to then suddenly deal with that level of trauma. I don't think so. I lived in 1967 to 1974 was the reign of the military dictatorship in Greece. And I remember seeing a documentary just after that era of all of these guys in Crete that had a very strong tribal culture. They'd all been imprisoned. They'd all been tortured. Extreme kind of thing that in American culture would lead to probably irreparable damage to their mental health. They'd probably be broken people the rest of their days. But because they had such a strong tribal and communal structure, there was this whole world around them that they could come back to from that extreme experience, which was shared with other people, so there were people they could talk about it, but also there were very, very strong bonds, communal and familial, extended familial bonds. And to me, it seemed that's where the real healing potential comes from. That's individual therapy, dealing with these problems as an individual. I don't think it works.
Yeah, and, my favorite thing to talk about is the village idea, right? So, when we had a village that was there to care for everyone in the village, then if someone needed to sleep all day, there should be space for that, and the people with the energy can go out and gather the food or make the fire or whatever. But we just don't have that type of structure in place. And like in our own community, we have people that are having difficulty assimilating to the normal, I was using quotation marks around normal, by the way.
Well, but that's a real thing. People have a conception of what normal is, and they want to adjust themselves. But who decides?
Well, it's when you
Stephen
can't
decides.
function, when you can't
You're
function.
idealizing this community.
The part of Charles today would be played by Stephen Hurwitz.
The notion that community can take care of it all, etc. I think that's like an idealization of it.
It is, but I would say what most people call community is people I live in the same zip code as, or people I stand next to once a month. That is what community means. And so what I would think about community is one that has an economy and it survives based on what it's able to produce and consume locally, one in which people see each other on a daily basis. I'll tell you, I have friends in Eastern Europe where everyone in their village goes to their parents' house once a month for a meal, for a cup of coffee, to say hello, whatever. People are constantly cycling through each other's homes. They're constantly in contact. Now, we want to live in an anonymous culture, which reinforces our fantasy lives in some way, or is a part of that. And that's the problem, is the anonymity. So, Stephen, if you want to come by, come by.
Before I go, I just did get back to this business of the police. I don't want to lose that, but just something that people don't recognize too often is that, the police themselves have tremendous problems with mental stability. They're in a very high-stress place. They have a tendency towards high drug use. They have connections to people, the dealers, etc. So they have connections to a lot of drugs that pass through their hands. And they're reluctant to ask for help. Their jobs are on the line. These people are, there's a lot of mental instability in the very people that are being asked to deal with mental instability in the community at large.
Very stressful full-time work. And every time you get out of your car, of course, they don't walk around streets anymore.
No. And they don't stop by and say
cops
hello
anymore.
That's it.
Except Doug Pittman walks in here now and again. That's a wonderful thing. Actually, Stephen, we have another caller, but let me bring them on the line as well. Caller, you're on the air. What's your name, please?
Hi, it's Martine.
Hey, Martine.
Hey.
I'm going to say goodbye to you guys. So
Take care,
okay,
Stephen.
thank you,
Hi,
Stephen.
Stephen.
my call.
Thanks, man.
I missed the beginning where you defined the topic, but I think it's roughly dealing with mental illness.
Well, the shorthand is mental illness because it fit in the illustration. But it's about how it's dealt with in our culture, how difficult it is to get proper treatment. And
well, this is something
stigma.
I'm sort of incredibly connected to due to family members, and have done many decades of research on and have really strong feelings about. And just wanted to say, with regard to community helping, it has to be healthy, connected, caring community. And most of our so-called communities are too much lost in separation, and most of what is called normal, in my view, is completely sick and toxic.
Hooray, Martine. Everybody's backing me up on this today. No more.
And then to say how our system deals with it. Currently, I have a family member who is being forced by the county to take an extremely toxic drug that is definitely destroying the thyroid and the kidney, such that leads to having to be on dialysis and get a kidney transplant. And that is to deal with issues that that this person and I and a qualified professional determined were caused, episodes that were caused by drug and alcohol use that was caused by trauma. So are they treating the trauma? No, not really. They just want to dose the so-called symptoms.
Yeah.
And if this person doesn't take this toxic drug, they go to jail. And that is insanity. And I know that it's somebody who already spent 2 months in jail, and that means in a 6x8 locked down cinder block, no light, no access to earth or plants or anything that would be healthy, drinking toxic water, eating toxic food. Does that make the person better? I don't think so. And during that time, practically no contact with any mental health professional, like somebody who barely knew the person's name, had 5 minutes to look at maybe some of what they were dealing with and sort of talk to them through a slit in the door.
Wow.
So that's our Marin County. We have super wealth, but this is how we're treating people. And the so-called STAR program, I went to court several times, and I saw these people stumbling in with incredibly toxic side effects, and all the judge did was say, are you taking your medicines as required? And they'd mumble something. One guy tried to stand up and say, hey, I don't need these meds. I need minerals. I've done research on this. I know what my brain... Blah, shut up, sit down, or go to jail,
Oh, God.
And they don't want to hear about the very well-researched alternatives. And if there's anybody out there who's listening who wants to try to help me connect to others who are dealing with this, I'm really desperately right now seeking a psychiatrist who wouldn't charge me $300 for 15 minutes to be willing to work with me and to testify to the court and to get this family member off the super toxic drug, but I really need help. We know what would work. Lithium orotate is a really well-researched, non-toxic alternative to the very toxic lithium carbonate. And then TrueHope.com is a really good resource. They really work with you online to help people get toxic meds and onto things that actually work to give the system what it needs to rebalance. So TrueHope.com is a resource. But if you're caught in the trap of the county requirement, you can't even try any of those. So anyway, I'd love if anybody wants to connect with me, 415-868-9036. I really need community on this. I really need help. I'm really trying to save somebody's life, and there's a lot of other lives out there like that. If we could, make some inroads into this, just hopefully open things up a little bit.
Such a broken system. I mean, any thoughts of how we can change it? Like what's needed?
Yeah. Well, community, people who work together, come together and put pressure on the county to allow people who are not dangerous, who just want to work on alternatives. And for many of them that are so-called mentally ill, if they could just have a decent place to live and have some security, food and shelter security, and maybe a garden to work in with other people, and we could create eco-villages instead of mental asylums.
Yes.
It was interesting. I mean, what you described, Martine, and we do have another caller I should point out here on Let's Talk. Martine, is just what all of us need. We all need actual communities rather than Disneyland communities. We need gardens to
Real
work in.
connection.
We need a secure place to live. I mean, so I think that some people are able to function within this economic order that requires you to be a lonely drone dedicated to your work and your institution, blah, blah, blah. Some people can deal with that. And the people who can't, who are sometimes our greatest artists, sometimes our greatest intellectuals, the great gifts that they have to give to all of us, are utterly destroyed by such a cold, conformist, isolating and isolated type of way of living. And I, for one, find it really awful. That's why I don't live in a city. But you come out to a place like West Marin, you find many of the same conditions. It's not in just one place and or the other. It's all over. It's in the whole culture.
Thank you for your show. I'll hang up.
Thank you, Martine.
Thank you, Martine, very much. Let's see. So, caller. We have another caller. You're on the air.
Hi, it's Mia calling.
Oh,
Mia.
Hey.
Yeah.
From the studio. Just enjoying the show, and just wanted to mention, was talking to 3 of my friends from high school this week, and 2 of them are high school teachers, and we were just talking about the difference in terms of like how mental health was treated in our high school versus how it's treated now. And so as much as I don't agree with all of the medication that's being sort of thrown in especially kids and teens' way, I don't think that's a good thing. But I do think that it seems like there's a lot less stigma and a lot more services. So I think that on the bright side, I think from everything I've seen and from talking to them about their students and their teaching and stuff, it seems like the kids are getting earlier help and more comprehensive help, and it's less of a big deal to seek help for whatever issue you're dealing with mentally. So as much as I don't like all the meds, I think that is a good thing and a good direction that we're going in. So just wanted to mention that in terms of, high school 10, 15 years ago versus now. It seems like there's a different attitude about that.
Well, that's good to hear. Although, you juxtapose it against Martine's member of her family who was put in a jail cell. I don't know.
Yeah, there's so many different many different things. I think, fortunately, I do think in some circumstances there's less stigma than even a few short years ago in terms of seeking help. I think that it's less of like you are completely 100% flawed. It's just like, no, you have an issue, and we're
I think that's probably true. I think we're more sort of surface care about mental issues than we used to be as a society.
But the interesting thing,
but I think isn't it? It isn't just mental, isn't it? You see someone in a wheelchair, obviously compromised and maybe having trouble. People tend to not look and look away, and it's the same thing with mental issues and with homelessness and all that. You look away. You don't make eye contact.
Well, the scariest thing about actually homelessness and the suffering of other people is that the discipline of living in a city, or maybe the discipline of living, in any place in America today, is you train yourself ultimately to deny empathy. You don't see the suffering of those people. Right. But I would say this is what we're talking about there with people not feeling a stigma. That's that other type, it's the name of Irving Goffman's book, that's that other type of so-called mental illness, which is an inability to conform, an inability to fit yourself into what you're supposed to be. And high schools are cookie cutters. That's why compulsory public education was set up, is to create cookie cutter people for cookie cutter jobs. And so the interesting people actually in high school are the misfits. As a high school teacher one year, that's what I really loved. The smart kids are creepy.
There's something
they
to
play it.
distinguish here is between being different or a misfit or outside the box and aggressive, violent.
Well, that's the other side.
Like
no,
that.
Because that's
and that there's.
But that's the first type, right? That's the first. The people who are generally mentally ill do not feel stigma, right? They the people who are going to, attack people.
They have their own reality.
They have their own reality. People feel stigma. That is a social pressure. This is just Goffman's point, which is that is a response to a social condition where you're supposed to behave a certain way.
Right.
If you do not behave in that way, people will avoid you. People will not like you. You will not be in with the in crowd or the clique or clique, as we used to say back in Flint, Michigan. In high school, I dropped out of. Well, got kicked out of high school.
That's the kind of thing that can breed suicidal thoughts for sure, depression in kids who want to be part of a
Right,
group,
wanting to
want to
fit
be
in.
part of a community, and when they're shunned because they're
Right.
weird in some way, or they dress different or whatever, suicide. Or if they're gay, I mean, gay suicides are huge.
I guess it's right. Although that's become more and more accepted, right? People would probably get thrown in jail if you tried to shun somebody because they were gay in a high school. So that's better today probably than it was in the past. But I say the people who feel that they do not fit in are right. And they should. That is the
Embrace it.
That is a stigma they should not feel. They should not feel as though other people are normal because they are not.
Right.
I
Right.
dated a woman. Thank goodness, not listening to the show years ago in college, who had very severe mental health problems on a whole. Lots of 5 different medication, antipsychotics, Lexapro, Lamictal, Seroquel, clonazepam or Klonopin, whatever. I mean, like all of them. And I really wasn't into pills. I had the opportunity. I really could use a 1 milligram Klonopin right now. Actually, if anyone has one, bring that down to the station. Only 1 milligram one though. She had this experience when the Iraq War broke out, right? Where she stopped her car in traffic, holding up traffic, just there in the middle of it. I mean, in like rush hour. I mean, there are like hundreds of cars disturbed by this. And a female police officer approached her car that stopped there, like crossing 2 lanes. And she sort of paralyzed there at the wheel. And she's saying that, she attributed it or she was talking about at that moment, she was having a manic episode or something like that, right? So she had real mental health problems in some other sense, that she was how disturbed she was of the outbreak of the Iraq War. She was right. People thought, oh, she's crazy. Well, everybody should have done that. We all should have stopped our cars and disrupted. But, it was always, again, because, she's on medication, she's crazy. Anyway, I had the chance to talk to her, I don't know, a year ago or something like that. And she's married, has a baby. She doesn't take all those drugs anymore. All the drugs are gone, right? And very, always was a high-functioning professional, but still is, and very successful and all the rest of it. And I think back to that, and that experience of, say, the really defining event of the last 20 years, which is the Iraq War. And here is this person who was so sensitive that they were overwhelmed by their contact with the world, having this experience. People call that mental illness. I don't want anything to do with it. I thought she was right.
Yeah.
Well,
Interesting that she was able to get off all the meds. That's
took years and years, and a lot of unhappiness and a lot of difficulty.
And as I said earlier, there's an article that was posted today, Scientific American, I think, of 80% of us go through, from depression to psychotic breaks to all kinds of things
Isn't it all
during
natural?
our lifetime.
Well, the thing that's
Why not?
that's
our
horrifying,
our
though.
lungs don't work, our hearts sometimes don't beat properly, our brain sometimes goes
Well,
off.
but what
Yeah,
about
yeah.
grief?
Yeah.
What about the
Yeah,
experience
yeah.
of grief? So you're depressed. Oh, did somebody die in your family? Oh, yeah. So this medicalization of the normal experience of life is really creepy. But again, you
Yeah.
always have to be at work at 9 a.m. That's the bottom line.
Well, I think-
your father was torn to pieces by alligators, but those that report is due. So if you could just come in tomorrow, that would be great. That's where the pills come in. You have to remove that sine curve, that wonderful diversity of emotional experience which life should be filled with. You have to level it all out so you can be the best possible employee. That's what I have to say.
Well, I guess the thing that concerns me is those who do go so far that they frighten people and they get thrown in jail or killed when in fact they can't help it. And we don't seem to have a better system in place right now.
A system at all seems to me to be the problem. I mean, the thing is that the institutionalization of all these functions that used to be communal functions.
Right.
We used to have ways to help people be born into the world and to help them die. We used to do these things as communities and have rituals around them and traditions around them, and we survived for 1,000 generations doing just that. This new idea is that there must be a professional because we are incompetent to look after each other. We are incompetent to respond to each other when
Not
we're
true.
in
Yeah,
distress.
right.
A professional has to do it, and then perhaps that professional with the special authority that they have is going to dole out the medication.
Well, even with the police, we don't engage as neighbors. If something goes wrong, we pick up the phone and call the sheriff.
Not me.
They're
I
always
call
in their
Porterfield.
cars. They're always in their cars, right? I mean,
Well, I mean,
how
if you
can
read the sheriff's calls, sometimes a person was walking down the road. Like,
Terrifying. Well,
but
think of
a child was playing in the park alone.
Someone's calling these in. That's where the problem is.
That's right.
Right. Well, and because we're not just, reaching out to each other and,
I'm looking forward to the sheriff's calls and point is like 1 week, which is just caller arrested, caller called in, child, the caller was arrested.
I wanted to, despite Martine's story about the county, I do have some phone numbers here which might be of assistance to people who are in crisis. So I thought I'd just before the end of the show, I thought we'd read out some of these numbers. Crisis services. This is the Marin County Health Services. 24/7 phone line is 1-888-818-1115, and they provide information and screening. There's detox services. There's the care team, which provides outreach and engagement services to homeless individuals with mental illness, which is 415-847-1266. There's a crisis residential unit, Casa Rene, a 10-bed crisis residential unit, an alternative to locked acute treatment. No, not treatment. Just putting them away. 415-473-6666.
It's a bad sign. But I would say,
and the crisis stabilization unit, which is actually at Marin General, which is also 473-6666.
just quickly, I mean, if somebody's having a psychotic break with reality and they're a danger to themselves and other people, you need to maybe call the police. If somebody feels out of step with the world and they think that there's something really, really wrong and they don't understand why they don't fit in, you make friends with them.
Yeah.
And anybody who thinks that this is normal, what's going on every day, avoid them like the plague. It's the invasion of the body snatchers. It really is.
The pod arrived.
The pod is, yes.
A cozy
Thank
bed,
you.
A cup of tea.
Yeah.
Thank
good
you
friend.
very much, both of you. And thank you to our callers and listeners. It was a grand show.
Thank you, Paul.
Yes,
Yes.
if you're in trouble, call 911. That always works, doesn't it? Okay. We'll see you next week at 11. Bye for now.